I like your picture, Bungie, even though I know you're moving house.
Sorry.
Hello,
Okay, we're
everybody.
online now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back again to our TLTS research channel. For those of you who are new to our channel, welcome. And I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our channel. And you can also press the bell so that you can get reminders of our upcoming seminars. Now, before we start our seminar today, I'd like to announce the next seminar, which is on July 1st in North American time and July 2nd, early morning, same time, in Asia Pacific time. So it is about intercultural citizenship education and English as a lingua franca. And we will have Dr. Peter DeCoster, who's also the incoming next president of the AAAL, American Association of Applied Linguistics. So we are very happy to have him to have this seminar with us on July 1st, 5 p.m. Vancouver time, and July 2nd, 8 a.m. Hong Kong and Singapore time. Or Australia, it will be 10 a.m. in the morning. Okay, now back to today's seminar. I'm so happy and so privileged. We have the honor of having Professor K.K. Luke with us to have this seminar on conversation analysis and the dynamical emergent local structures in conversation analysis. KK has a very special connection with us and with me in particular, because back in the 1980s, KK was my supervisor, my master's of philosophy, MPhil, Masters of Philosophy supervisor. And I have benefited so much from KK, I call him Mr. Luke at that time. He's such a wonderful, wonderful supervisor and has inspired my interest in doing research. And so here I am. So I cannot say how happy I am to be speaking to KK. Now, now, without further ado, I would like KK answer questions. Okay, so over to you, KK.
Okay, thank you, Angel. Very nice to be brought back to me all the fond memories that we had in Hong Kong many, many years ago. You were one of my first, maybe the first graduate student. And I can still remember the excitement that both of us had, going into the research that you were doing for the master's dissertation at University of Hong Kong. The master's degree is actually a research degree, as you know, so there's a lot of reading and a lot of research to be done. It's not a coursework kind of degree. I think it's still like that in Hong Kong now. So after that, of course, Angel went on to do wonderful things, and I've been following her closely, and I feel very proud of your achievements. And of course, one of your big achievements is to run this group now, with graduate students, with postdoctoral fellows, with faculty and students, from both Canada, but also some from Hong Kong, and some other participants coming from other countries now. Of course, with the internet now, we can set up these international groups and people can just call in and join in, and it's a wonderful thing. It's not quite the same thing as face-to-face, but it's pretty good, 80% maybe of face-to-face. So, but it saves a lot of cost. Okay, so I don't have to fly all the way to to Vancouver or something. So that saves a lot of time as well. So how I propose to run the session today this morning is because I received some really good questions from some of you, most of you. And there's quite a few questions, you know, when Phoebe put them all together, you know, it came to like, you know, 6 or 7 pages of stuff. They're all good, but to be fair to everyone, let me proceed in this way. First, I will pick one question from each of you, okay? So at least I answer one of your questions. And then if there's time, we'll come back and pick a few other questions, okay? But before any of that, I just wanted to show you 1 or 2 video clips, because this is the data that we work with. And, you know, when you read my publications or when you read some other CA publications, you often, you know, and you see all this transcript, right? And you often wonder, so what, you know, what is it really like? You know, how do these people actually speak to each other and produce all this behavior for the benefit of each other? Because in the traditional way of publication, of course, you have a piece of paper, you know, and if you have some words on it, you may be able to produce some pictures or photos or line drawings, but nothing is like the real thing, which is a video of what, you know, what you actually see when people talk to each other and when they engage in interaction. So I just want to share with you one very short clip, which is the one that I show an analysis of as an example of how you do CA in the piece called just called conversation analysis, right? It's for a handbook, so it's meant to be a kind of introduction, right? It's meant to be a kind of brief description of the field. So that one, you've all seen it because it's, you know, it's in that paper. And some of you may have actually watched the video as well if you attended the last lecture. But in case you haven't, and to kind of refresh your memory, this is the video, this is the data that, am I sharing the video already? Screen
Nope.
you can see, right?
Nope, not yet.
Oh, not yet. Oh, sorry. So I better share first, okay.
Yeah.
So this video with the 3 students there is the one that I used for that entry on CA. This is the one. So we got 3 students there. It's one of the less well-made videos, okay? So it's a bit blurred and everything, but on the other hand, it's quite good for anonymity. So you can't really see them very clearly. So it's okay. Sometimes if you see them too clearly, I have to put some marks on their eyes or their faces so as to keep the anonymity sometimes. Other times I can show them if they have agreed to be shown, right? If I got their consent. So there are these ethics issues as well. But this one is the one where the 3 students are having a chat and Sam, the guy, is on the left, Anna in the middle, and May on the right. So May is the one who is being asked to, by Sam about her language, her choice of languages, because for these students, they all have to pick a second or foreign language to study as part of their degree program, okay? So let me just play this to you so you can actually see and hear Sam and Anna and May, okay?
Do you take? Oh,
She's not into Asian
she's not
language.
into, oh really, huh?
Not really.
Mo Pai.
Why cannot is it?
Do you take? Oh,
She's not into Asian
she's not
language.
into, oh really, huh?
Not really.
Mo Pai.
Why cannot is it?
Okay, yeah, so that's the video. Just to give you a sense of what the interaction actually looks like, actually feels like, and so that when you read the transcript, when you read the paper, and when you read my analysis, you get a better sense of, you know, why the lines of talk, why the turns of talk are described and commented upon the way they are in my article. Okay. So that's just one small example of the data. Okay, let me turn to the questions now. So let me start with Phoebe's question. She actually asked a number of questions. So let me maybe just comment on a question about multimodality. Okay, so Phoebe asked about multimodalities. Obviously, this is one of the themes in the two papers is, you know, when you look at an interaction, traditionally, you know, in sort of old-fashioned, you know, discourse analysis, you just look at a transcript and you do your analysis on that. But of course, as the video camera, the what you call it, the small one, right? The portable video camera became available and also became quite affordable, really, at least for people in the affluent countries. And of course, these days you don't even need a video camera. You can just use your smartphone, your cell phone, right? And you can make a video. So with this being so widely available and affordable and, you know, so readily usable because, you know, it's right in our hands, I really think there's no excuse now not to use video data. There's no point using audio data anymore unless you have a specific reason for it. For example, you cannot get the consent of the participants, or you're studying telephone conversations, which, I mean, these days, even phone conversations, you can turn on the video, right? So that makes it even more convenient. So with that comes, of course, the issue or the possibilities of multimodality, meaning in your analysis, you cannot really, you don't have an excuse for saying, oh, you know, I don't know whether the guy was smiling or crying when he said this, right? You have no excuse. You must know whether he's smiling or crying or not doing anything at all with his face. So the face, you know, the body, of course, you know, all come into the picture. And so when someone says something, you know, so on the transcript, it looks quite simple. It's just a line of words, right? It's kind of like a sentence. But actually, as we know, once we look at this kind of data, then we see that there's all kinds of things going on concurrently and in accompaniment with, at the same time as the words, if you like, that are being said or being uttered by the particular participant in that situation. So, of course, not all of these body language features, if you like, may be relevant. We have to attend to the ones that we think are more relevant to what's going on. So, for example, as I said, if the person saying something is smiling, that often can mean something quite different from if he was not smiling, right? So we typically want to take note of that. But if the guy is scratching his head or something, this may or may not have anything to do with anything, right? Except that he's a bit itchy on his head. So we kind of ignore that, right? So obviously we have to exercise our good judgment in doing this kind of analysis. But nevertheless, multimodality, so-called multimodality, has become like the name of the game, right? Like you cannot do without that. So the specific question, now to come back to Phoebe's question, I think she's thinking here more specifically about what she calls technologies, right? So multimodal technologies or technology-aided analysis. So this is a very good question. And, you know, like our, you know, being academics and being kind of researchers, right? Our natural kind of inclination is to think, oh, so there's multimodality, right? So how do we study that? And, you know, wouldn't it be nice if we had a machine or a couple of machines or a suite of software on the computer that could kind of help us with that? And there are people who are actually pursuing these lines of research, particularly in Europe. So if you're familiar with some of the groups in Europe, like the Max Planck Institute people, you know, or some of the the Scandinavian countries that also do a bit of that, and some of the other European countries, of course, also in the US and so on. What they do is they use some instruments to help them in this project. Okay, so for example, they may use an eye tracker, right, to track the eyes, or they may, in fact, I've seen papers where the participants, okay, so you make a recording of an interaction, right? But instead of just 2 or 3 guys sitting around drinking a cup of coffee and talking to each other, you have guys wearing some headgear. It looks like a robot, right? Robotic looking thing that you put on your head, and then you've got this eye tracker, you know, that is being put on your nose ridge, and you've got some stuff hanging out of your machine that reads some brainwave or something, right? Anyway, so all kinds of machinery to do some readings of what's going on in your head or in your body. Also, maybe you have some electric nodes on your arms, so which can track your arms, right? So that's all very nice. Of course, it's a bit like in phonetics, for example, right? You use more sophisticated machines to track, you know, how the speech signal goes every minute of the in its progression. So all of this, of course, helps because it gives you some kind of foundation, some kind of basis in the empirical data that you have, right? Some kind of measurement. So I'm not, I don't mind that. But what I do need to remind everyone, if you use this kind of machinery or instrumentation, don't be fooled into thinking that the instruments or the machines will do the work for you. Because at the end of the day, you're doing a human analysis of a human interaction, okay? Like there's a bunch of guys talking and doing things as naturally as possible. And there's you, who is also a human researcher or analyst, who is trying to make some sense of it, okay, using the conceptual apparatus that we call CA or discourse analysis or some other form of analysis. The instruments and the machines and the measurements may help you in doing that, or may pin down certain material facts for you, like, you know, what is the heart rate, you know, where is the gaze fixed on, and all that. Then you have some kind of evidence of that. But that is never, I mean, it's the machine's not going to do an automatic analysis for you, right? Because, however, I suppose AI is going to become so good one of these days that it can do some of that work. But still, when it comes to human interaction, at least, you know, in our current state of knowledge, it's so complex that even the best, strongest AI cannot really hope to produce the kind of analysis that we do. One, because it's complex. Secondly, because what you see on the machines, as I said just now, may or may not be relevant. You see, so suppose, you know, the guy's arm is a little bit raised, you know, this way or that way. Well, yeah, you can measure that, and the AI can see that. But is it relevant to what he's doing? We don't know, right? We don't know.
Sorry to.
You have to exercise some kind of judgment.
Hi, KK. Sorry,
Thank you.
I saw a Bongi has a relevant question.
Right.
Relevant to this. Okay, Bongi, could you ask your question?
Yeah. So and thank you so much for that. And then one of the question, and that is something that has been really troubling me when I understand CA or ethnomethodology, because it's not the data that is speaking to you. It has to be the analyst who has to analyze this. However, when CA or CA folks are doing is, it's the participant. It's what they argue is that it has to be ME perspective. It has to be participant relevant. Then it kind of sort of erases the analyst's gaze. And so I find it's kind of somewhat contradictory, no? I mean, I'm just kind of constantly questioning. It seems like CA oftentimes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Before KK, I jump in. You said the data speaking to you. Okay, data never speaks to anyone. Data never speaks. It's the person who interprets the data. Okay, over to you, KK. The data cannot speak to you. It's always an interpreter, a human interpreter. But over to you, KK.
Right. Okay. Bongi, right? Bongi. Yeah. Very good question. I also appreciate your other questions that you already sent in, and I'll try and answer some of those. Very, very good question, because obviously you're doing some serious thinking about this kind of enterprise, right? Like, what are we trying to do here? And it's true that there's something of an issue to be addressed when we realize that on the one hand, we're saying that the kind of analysis we're doing is to be kind of validated by, you know, against the intersubjectivity that is being produced by the participants in an interaction, not by the analyst as an outsider or as an observer, but to be validated by, if you like, by the participants themselves. On the one hand, okay, we are very insistent on that. Okay, we're very big on that. But on the other hand, there is nevertheless the researcher or the observer, you know, and as Angel said, you know, he or she is making the observations. He or she is is doing the interpretation and writing the analysis and so on. And we can't pretend that it's not there, right? I mean, obviously, the guy who does the analysis is a different person from the participants themselves. And indeed, he takes a video recording or, a record of the interaction, and he comments on it, basically, right? And he shares this with his readers. So how do we resolve that tension, between those two phenomena? Okay, how I approach this is to say that they're both true, and of course, in an ideal world, I mean, in an ideal world, if one were able to take a position which is not a third-party position, but which is an endogenous or internal position, like if you can insert yourself in between these two guys who are talking to each other without being seen, like they can't see you, right? But you can see them, right? And also, like, you're not a third person anymore, but you're part of this whole interaction. And also you completely, fully understand what each of these participants is thinking or doing, everything about the history and background, everything about their aspirations and thoughts and plans. In other words, if you were God, you could potentially, in principle, produce such an analysis, but nobody is God. I mean, there's only one God, according to any particular religion, okay? I don't mind a particular religion, but in any kind of system of thought that contains or that has an element of some kind of supernatural being who oversees everything, then that is the one who can do that. But nobody else can do it. So the observer or the analyst is no exception, obviously. So we must accept our limitations. We have to accept our limitations, like we propose an analysis of this interaction. And we try to get as close to what we think is the participants' viewpoint as they produce their intersubjectivity together, okay? Of course, there's always a margin of error in that analysis, like to the extent that, like, how much do you know about these people, for example, right? Sometimes you know practically nothing. But that's amazing too, that, you can do a pretty nice analysis of a little bit of an encounter between two strangers, for example, who don't know each other, and you don't know them either. You know absolutely nothing about either of them. But they're just standing at the bus stop and they just said one or two things to each other. Oh, what a nice day. Yeah, great day. Oh, bus coming. You can do a little bit of analysis of that. And if you do a good job of it, your readers are going to kind of agree with you. They kind of like it, right? They kind of support it, right? They second it. Well, then you've done a good job of it. But as to whether your description represents the truth of the matter, whatever that means, then you don't know, right? You just don't know. And we don't pretend to know the truth, or we don't fool ourselves into thinking that we understand everything that is being done or said and done between these two persons. All we say is, there are certain aspects in that interaction that we can see as an observer. We're not pretending we're not an observer, but we hope our observations are, at least in principle, validated, can be validated, in principle, can be validated by the participants themselves. But that in itself is also an issue, you see, because what does validation mean? Like what we ask them. Asking them is not the same thing as observing them. Because you ask someone, oh, you said this a moment ago to this guy, right? So what do you mean by that? The answer that he gives you about what he did a moment ago may or may not be true, right? Because obviously,
They
things
can
have
make up a
moved on.
story to tell you.
They can make up a story,
Yeah.
exactly.
KK,
They
I
can
can
say
see-
something else. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see Bungie has a follow-up.
Okay.
It's almost like the observer's paradox. KK, remember in my oral defense?
Yeah. Yes.
I still remember you gave me a tip before I enter into the MPhil exam hall. You said, Angel, do you know how to answer the question about the observer's paradox? Now you have this exam question.
Right.
It's asking.
Yeah, the standard exam question. Yeah.
Yeah, is that when there is a researcher, a recorder,
Right,
whatever,
Absolutely,
hearing,
yeah.
would that affect the naturalness, right? So-
Yes, it would. So we have to be honest with our data, as I said, we don't pretend to know the truth or to own the truth, right? Particularly, we don't put ourselves up as knowing more than the participants. That is a very important point. Like, what do you know about them? Just a little bit, right? To be sure they know more about themselves than you do, right? So that's one thing. But the observer's paradox. So there are two aspects here that are very important. One is the role of the observer is always there. So increasingly, academics in different subjects, including in the sciences, in the natural sciences, are accepting this idea now. So in physics, for example, before Einstein, right, people used to think, within this Newtonian physics framework, that what they're describing, the world that they're describing with their forces and their formulas, and their calculations, is how the world works. This is the world, and we're describing it. And if we describe it right, correctly, then that is the correct description. Well, when Einstein comes along, he says, wait a minute, you're describing this universe, right? So what is your role in that process? The scientist role. Turns out that the observer also is part of that formula, if you like. Like, you cannot have a description or an observation without an observer, right? So it's obvious, like, if you're on a train, for example, we've all had this experience, right? And you look out the window and you see the train next to you going backwards. Well, the train is not going backwards because your train is going faster. So, from your vantage point, the next train is going backwards. But from the vantage point of someone standing on the platform, both trains are going forward. So, the observer obviously must come into it, right? So I think it's now standard practice in physics and in the natural sciences that you have to be careful where you stand when you describe something. So again, so it's the same point that I was making. The other thing about observer's paradox in the case of CA is we try to collect what we call naturally occurring data. So what that means is, basically what it means is we don't set up a situation in order to collect the data. So we don't do an experiment, for example. We don't say, oh, here's this thing, and I tell you a story, and then you pretend like, you were one of the characters in it, and what would you do to that in this situation, whatever. So you set up something, and that is called, that is not naturally occurring, okay? It's not naturally occurring in the sense that if you didn't set up that situation, the guy wouldn't do any of these things. You're kind of putting him into a situation where he has no choice but to do something. Furthermore, not only no choice, but he's going to do the thing that he does against his understanding of what you wanted him to do. What is the point of you putting him in that situation, you see?
That's right. So that's the artificialness of interviews. I remember Bongi has a question about interviews, but I do think CA people have analyzed interviews a lot of.
Yeah, we've also analyzed interviews, but when we analyze interviews, and we don't lose sight of the fact that the interviewer is trying to do something as he asks his questions. And we don't lose sight of the fact that the respondent is answering the question with some ideas in mind, some understanding, some assumptions in mind about the point of the interviewer's question. Now, why is he asking me this, right? There's a great book that you can read about interviews called why is he asking me now, this question now, something like that, right? So it's like this is a question that the first question that the respondent has in his mind before he answers your question. So there are very good studies of that in CA, looking at the interview as a particular kind of interaction, okay? But to come back to the data collection, so again, in CA, it's like what I said just now, we don't pretend to know the truth about a piece of interaction. Neither do we pretend that the data that we collect is 100% natural. And I used to be able to do that some years back before the ethics committees were set up, right? Like, what did I do? I hide the recorder under the table, right?
I think a lot of those language acquisition people, they tape record their children. They are in trouble now.
They're in trouble.
For their children.
You cannot, you know, even children, they have their rights, and you cannot just record them, you know. And I mean, even if they kind of agree to it now, when they grow up, they may regret it. So we have to be particularly careful here. But in the old days, like, you know, one of my first set of recordings was actually a telephone recordings, a set of telephone calls. And in those days, we used these pickup phones, right? You know, the big telephones on the table. And there used to be a little device. I can still do it, you know, you unscrew the phone, you put this thing in, and you put it back. So it looks like nothing has been done to the phone. But, you know, when you talk, then everything is recorded without the participants knowing it. So that one is close to perfect, right, in terms of naturalness. But one, I kind of regret doing it now, right? I shouldn't have done it, okay? It's not good. I think people should know, like, you know, would you like to participate in this research, and we're going to do this, right? So we have to, and once we do that, of course, the data is then less than completely natural. But it doesn't matter, because also in our experience, when you have a recording session like this, if it runs long enough, like, you know, after a few minutes, especially if the participants are good friends or their family members, they're just having a meal, right? Then they more or less forget the camera. I don't know how much. I mean, again, it's an individual thing. Some people completely seem to forget completely. Others kind of still a bit conscious. But by and large, especially when they start talking about something that really means something to them, like some funny thing that happened at their brother's wedding last week or something, you know, or something particularly emotional, whatever. Then, you know, when you're completely engaged and involved in that experience, you can't keep an eye on the camera too much at the same time. So like at the same time. So it's kind of like, I would say you're 90% natural. 90% natural. And that's good enough. That's good enough. That's a lot better than an experimental situation, you see. So everything we do, there's no perfection in what we do, okay, except God, okay? And we have to admit that we are limited in our data, and we're limited in our concepts, and we're limited in how much access we can get into people's minds and into their behaviors. But within those limits, we do our best, okay? So to get 90%, you get an A, okay? You get an A, but you don't get 100%. Okay, so that's I think I probably have answered some other questions as well along the way, because first we started with multimodality. And then we moved on to a question of observations and naturally occurring data and so on. So, in fact, this question about naturally occurring data that Bongi asked in the Google Doc, I've more or less already answered, right? So let me move on to our next question. So Bongi has asked some other questions. So as I said, let's come back to them. You have asked quite a few. So some of these are very good questions. So we can come back to them. Let's move on to Angel's question about intercultural interaction. It's very interesting, you know, like people coming into an interaction with some cultural knowledge, right, and some cultural background, right, and some assumptions about interactions that are kind of prompted and supported by their culture. But if the interaction turns out to be between participants who have somewhat different backgrounds and therefore making somewhat different assumptions, then how might this impact upon their interaction? How might this impact upon the shape of their actions and so on? So that's a very interesting question. So I was looking for some data to show this, and I found this piece of data that I have. So let me share this with you. This is a recording that we did actually in China some years ago, of course, before COVID-19 and so on, when exchange students in Europe and in US came to China to study Chinese, okay? So they come from different countries. And I can't even remember all the names, okay? So they come from, you know, Finland and Italy and different European countries. So let's kind of keep that in mind. Okay, so this is the background. Now, this particular clip, I call it ballpoint pen because it's about a pen. And as you can see, the guy on the left there is kind of looking at a pen, right? So he's got a pen in his hands.
Can you initiate screen sharing? Sorry.
Look,
yeah.
Sorry. Sorry. I was just looking at the. Okay, so we've got a bunch of students here. And as I said, most of them, in fact, all of them are from either Europe or North America. And for today's purpose, I don't think we need to go into so many details, like each of them, you know, they're from a different country and so on, but they're all doing the Chinese course, right? In a city in China, including this guy who is now looking at the pen, right? His name is Kerry. And you might say he looks like a Chinese guy, right? At least he's got black hair and yellow skin and all that. But actually he's from Canada. So he probably was born in like second generation immigrant or something. He was born in Canada. And that's why his parents sent him to China to learn Chinese, right? Because he can't speak Chinese, or he can't speak it very well, okay? He's a Canadian guy. So it's quite interesting. I call this little clip ballpoint pen because they're talking about this pen. Okay, so let's listen to it.
How do you, yeah, you can go into if you want to. How do you retract it?
Yeah.
If the holder, you push the holder down.
Yeah. Is it too hard for your brain to figure it out? You're so mean.
You're Chinese.
Don't be mean.
Yeah, you have to read that stuff.
He's mean. He doesn't want to eat
You
with
have to
us.
be
Yeah? I don't want to go to Akihabara too.
Okay, let me play it one more time because yeah, the sound recording is not quite so high quality. Okay, but I think we can more or less make out what they say. Let's just listen one more time. So obviously the focus now is on the pen. Okay, so Carrie holding the pen and trying to work with it. Like how do you do it? You know, how do you retract the pen? And then the others come in to make their comments and the jokes and so on, right? So let's watch it one more time.
How do you, yeah, you can go into if you want to. How do you retract it?
Yeah.
If the holder, you push the holder down.
Yeah. Is it too hard for your brain to figure it out? You're so mean.
You're Chinese.
Don't be mean.
Yeah, you have to read that stuff.
He's mean. He doesn't want to eat
You
with
have to
us.
be
Yeah? I don't want to go to Akihabara too.
Very nice, right? Okay, so here's a transcript of that bit. Huh? So line one, Kerry, okay, the Canadian guy holding the pen. Then he says, how do you retract this? Obviously asking everyone for their help and suggestion, right? Because he wants to retract the pen and he's trying to figure out how to do that. And then the guy on the right, you remember the guy on the far right, he's called Mike. He says, you hold the holder, you push the holder down. Okay, so he's pointing to the pen and he says, you push the holder down. But as we can see, Kerry is still trying to do that, you know, so probably he's looking for the holder, where to push. And then at this point, Anna and Inga, the two girls, you know, one to the left and one to the right of Kerry, they both started kind of pointing because they're quite near to him. They start pointing their fingers to that part of the pen where Kerry should push. So they're both doing that. And then in line 5, then Inga now says, is it too hard for your brain to figure out? So this transcript here, we should insert some laughter after that, because I think it's quite clear that Inga didn't mean this seriously, if you like. It's more like a joke, right? More like a teasing kind of turn. And she's obviously speaking to Kerry. She's looking at Kerry and she says, is it too hard for your brain to figure it out? Then laugh, right? Of course, referring to the fact that Kerry still cannot retract the pen after all this help, right? Whereupon line 6, Anna, the other girl on the other side of Kerry, now says, you're so mean, don't be so mean, right? So commenting, of course, on Inga's comment, which could, of course, be interpreted as a mean comment. But she's also laughing, so it's not like, I mean, they're not having an argument. It's more like, hey, come on, you know, be nice, right? So everything is kind of a bit playful. I don't mean to say they're having any arguments, no. They're friends. So then at this point, something interesting happens. Mike, the guy, you know, who first said, you know, press and hold, you know, push the holder down. Now he comes back and he says, you're Chinese. And then line 8, we skip that, okay, because some other guy's trying to say something, but we focus on Mike at this point. Then line 9, he goes on to say, so you're Chinese, you guys create that stuff. Meaning you make this stuff, right? You sell this stuff to us, right? So you should know, right? Something like that. And then Inga says, he's mean, he doesn't want to eat with us. So as a kind of defense, right? It's kind of self-defense, like, well, you know, I didn't mean to be mean to him, but he wouldn't come and have dinner with us or have lunch with us. Again, of course, it's all a joke, right? As a kind of playful, jocular sort of defense of herself against Anna's sort of complaint, I suppose, that she was being mean. So finally, last, the other guy, a bit on the right, but not too far right, then now he comes in and says, you have to be smart. Meaning, if you're Chinese, you must be smart, right? Chinese guys are smart guys. Okay, I think that's how we can take it. So if we go back to the previous one, yeah, I think it's the boy sitting next to Mike who said that, right? So he's kind of building on, you know, taking Mike's comment as a platform to build his comment about smartness. So he turns this potential potentially critical remark, like, well, you make this stuff, right? And you don't know how to use it. Potentially critical, but last turns that into a compliment, right? Like, you have to be smart. You're Chinese, right? So his take is a bit different, right? So everybody's trying to steer away from this mean behavior, I suppose, right? So I think it's quite an interesting example of kind of intercultural communication or interaction here, because obviously these students, they all come from different countries, they have very different backgrounds, and they may be making all kinds of assumptions about things like, oh, you know, first of all, this guy Kerry, is he Chinese? I mean, strictly speaking, he may not even admit to it himself. Like, how do you mean I'm not Chinese? You know, I'm Canadian, right? So that's one thing. Or maybe I'm Canadian Chinese. Okay, so it's also possible. Or I'm Chinese originally. My parents came from China. Whatever. So you can make some long description out of that. But nevertheless, from Mike's comment in line 7, we can see that he's approaching this from his cultural perspective, if you like, right? So for him, someone who has the appearance of Kerry can be described or categorized as Chinese. So that's what he's doing here. Like, you're Chinese and you guys make that stuff.
Yeah.
So not only you know,
can I jump in here? I think you call it an intercultural situation. I think it is a minimally intercultural, even though they've come from different parts of the world. I could say they all speak English pretty well, number one. Number two, they all belong to a similar age group. Number three, they all come from, I would say, what we call the so-called Western developed countries, which is a big cultural backdrop which they share. And when I asked that question, it's really with like people coming from very different cultural contexts. This group of young people, I would say they share a similar culture, which is Western developed society, English speaking, kind of, I could see them watching YouTube, going to similar concerts. Even that Chinese looking guy is pretty much Anglo culture.
Right.
So yeah, anyway.
Yeah, that's all very true, because in a sense, there's probably a lot more similarities between them than differences. You know, if there's any difference, you know, there may not be too much difference, especially with the younger generation these days, whether they come from this country or that country matters less than, say, 50 years ago, right?
Right, and also social class, age, And also that Western culture backdrop. I could
Yeah.
see if one of them came from like Vietnam,
Mhm.
or one of them came from Iran, it would be, the cultural makeup will be much more diverse than this one.
Yes. So this one, as you correctly described, is kind of minimally cultural. It's true. But I just picked it for an example because it's kind of nice and short and manageable. We can, watch a little video of it. I have some other data also collected in China where some Chinese people are kind of talking to foreigners. These are foreign, people from other countries, UK or US. They come to China. They either they come to study or they come to do something business, and they come into contact with these Chinese kind of managers or clerical staff in a university or in a company. So I have some of that. It's very interesting. In fact, there are lots more cultural issues in the sense of they're trying to understand each other better. And you can see there's some gaps in those understandings. So maybe, if we have time, we can look at those separately because those are quite long transcripts. And we can look at those on another occasion. But yeah, you're quite right. If we look at that kind of data, we see a lot more issues. Like sometimes they may even misunderstand each other. Like, A thought B meant something other than what he or she actually intended to say. That kind
And
of thing.
also, yeah, intercultural and interposition, like if it's a workplace with some superiors or some subordinates. So the power differential. So these we would call more, John Gumpus calls these intergroup communication between people with different power differentials. I think John Gumpus did some work there. So it's very interesting. But that gives us another chance to invite you back sometime later.
Yeah, we can look at that later. Yeah, it's a big topic in itself, so we can focus on that with some more useful, more interesting data. But I mean, even this little bit of thing here, I think is quite interesting because it shows maybe not all these cultural differences, but the kind of assumptions that come with your upbringing and your education and your socialization and so on, and it's a good example of Harvey Sachs' membership categorization analysis, like how we categorize each other as we,
That's stereotypical Chinese, right? Smart, clever.
Yeah, you have to be smart, right? So
the stereotypes imposed on us.
Yeah, so it's a very stereotypical kind of comment. But you see this kind of thing, not only people verbalizing them, but sometimes they say something which is not directly about these assumptions, but things that are supported by these assumptions.
These are benign assumptions. Some are not so benign assumptions in intercultural communication. Some are really negative stereotypes.
Some can be negative, so we can find out a lot about these assumptions, especially when they are left unsaid. Or you have, gender issues or race issues or class issues or nationality issues, and so on. So this is a whole big field of study in itself.
Yep, that brings us to the question of how CA can be applied in more critically oriented studies. That is about social injustice or sexism, racism. That Bongi also asked this question. So I'm trying to bring it back. The CA is not just about studying horizontal, like you say, egalitarian situation between friends, right? It can also be what John Gumpus talked about, the intergroup communication with a lot of risk involved.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. In fact, I would say that one of the strengths of CA is that it's such a useful framework for the study of talk and interaction that you can use it for any kind of interaction. Basically, it's certainly not confined by its own limitations or by its own,
And classroom interactions,
right. In classroom,
where there's a lot of power differentials involved.
Yeah, teachers and students. One of my PhD students has written a thesis on classroom interaction in Hong Kong. So he comes from Hong Kong and he goes back and collects data from the minority schools, where you teach, right? Yeah, the
South
Indian,
Asian minorities,
South Asians.
Yeah.
And they try to learn Chinese and so on, and so,
actually my own MPhil and my own PhD are both using CA to analyze classroom.
Yeah, so we can do we can do classroom interaction. We can definitely study interactions where there are power differentials, and people have studied gender issues like Celia Kitzinger and others. So CA has been used to study many different kinds of situations where social dynamics are involved, different kinds of dynamics are involved. So certainly not confined to what we call kind of ordinary egalitarian kind of conversation. But on the other hand, the kind of stuff that we see here, they're the more sort of commonplace things, like, everyday situations that we have all a lot of experience with. We can more easily understand what's going on. So maybe that's one reason why, but certainly not confined to that. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, I got a couple of questions here from Gifty. Is it Gifty? So this one about a specific phenomenon of a three-party conversation, and the possibilities of a three-party conversation. So this is a very interesting point, because when we study interactions or conversations, right, we collect data from people who are having a conversation, for example. So there are different possibilities here, purely in terms of number of participants. So the minimal number usually is 2, okay? Even though I think it's also quite interesting to study people talking to themselves. So in that case, on the face of it, at least, on this service level, it's just one participant, but he's talking to himself. That is a special kind of case. But mostly we have 2-party, or you have 3-party, or you have 4 or more. Okay, of course you can have any number of people. But the curious thing about the number of participants is that it's not a simple matter of like 3 is slightly bigger than 2 and 4 is slightly bigger than 3. It's not quite so simple like that. It's more like because of the turn taking, right? Because of a conversation being organized around turn taking. In a 2-party conversation, most of the time, the turn taking is done between the 2 parties, obviously, okay? So when one party stops talking, then either the next turn is allocated to the other party, like by asking him or her a question, and then you stop talking, you ask him a question, you stop talking. So you wait for him to answer. And because the other party being the only other party, then it should be quite clear in most cases who the next speaker should be. Sometimes you don't directly allocate the turn to the next speaker, but you kind of stop saying something, you make a comment and you stop. So that opens up a space for the other party to respond to that or to give his comment on your statement. So in most cases, in a two-party setup, the turn-taking mechanism is quite kind of well defined in that sense. But once you have three people or more, let's say three, okay, then things become quite different, completely different almost, because let's say we have A, B, and C in an interaction, like what we saw just now, right? This clip where, not this one, there's another clip that, yeah, this one here, right? We have Sam, Anna, and May. So suppose Sam asks a question, okay, he could ask it in a number of different ways. One way is to address the question to one of the other two participants. So Sam can ask Anna a question, but not May, okay? So the question can be framed and shaped and built in such a way as to be clear that the person who is being asked the question is, say, Anna, but not May. Or the other way around, he can ask the question to May as he does, like, do you take, what language, right? What language do you take? By putting his gaze on May, but also maybe by naming her or by building the question in a particular way, so that it's clear that May is the intended addressee, in which case Anna will be excluded from that. So then there already we have two possibilities. We have May to take the next turn, or we have Anna to take the next turn. But Sam can also ask the kind of question which is open to both of them. Like, oh, do you guys know, where is a good restaurant to eat in this part of town? Not meaning to ask either May or Anna, but either of them could answer that question. So the question, it's in the design of the question, the shaping of the question, that he needs to show that it's meant to be an open question in the sense of being answerable by either May or Anna. So that's a third possibility. Fourth possibility is he can ask the question in such a way as to show that it is not addressed to either May or Anna. It's more like he's asking himself a question, right? So I have some data where a speaker may be in the middle of saying something, and then he says, oh, what's his name? This guy, what's his name? And he's not looking at either Anna or May. He's kind of looking into the, space up there, or looking down. But whatever he does, he's avoiding eye contact with either of the participants, because otherwise it would be a different kind of question, okay? Because if you say, oh, what's his name? And you say this with a gaze on Anna, that means that you expect Anna to know who you're talking about, and you are seeking help from her to recall the name, and so on, right? So just by looking at the way one of the participants designs a question, we can see many different possibilities that come out of a three-party conversation. When we get to four or more, then the situation quickly becomes more volatile, and more unsteady, if you like. So we also have data that involve like 4 or 5 or 6 people. And if it's really natural, like, they're not all made to focus on something, right? It's like they're set free to talk about whatever they want. Then after a while, we often see the 4 or 5 people splitting into groups of 2 or 3. And in effect, having different conversations or parallel conversations, you see. It's very hard to sustain a conversation with like 4 or more people unless they have a common focus. Like they're trying to, they're doing a project or something, right? They're having a group project and they all, even that, sometimes people start talking about some aspect of the project with the one next to them or the guy across the table, and they start kind of disintegrating into a bunch of different conversations. So those are some of the possibilities. So that's my sort of quick answer to give this question about 3-part or 3-party or 4-party conversations. Any follow-up on this one or any comments on it?
Then in the classrooms, it's definitely more than 2 parties. But as you say, it's in a classroom, right? Especially in East Asian classrooms, you might have 40 students, 30 students. And as you said, they will split up into multiple participation frameworks, like the government's front stage, the back stage. So with a classroom videotape, which was actually my struggle, how to analyze that, right? So
Well, in that kind of a classroom, like Hong Kong or China, where you have like 30, 40 students, typically what happens is that, you see, there's a lot of disciplinary work to be done, right? So first, the teacher needs to assert his or her authority and, ask everyone to be quiet, to keep quiet, because if they start talking, it's going to be chaos, right? Once, different, as I said just now, the situation will quickly disintegrate into multiple conversations. They all be talking about different things and nobody can listen, can hear what the teacher's saying. So that's why the discipline is so important, because, the authority means, everybody has to at least not interrupt, right, and disturb and disrupt the main conversation, which is between the teacher and the class. So when the teacher asks a question, there are different ways of doing it, obviously. One is to ask the class a question, and there are ways of doing that. Of course, sometimes by explicitly saying class, right? But sometimes just by asking a question in a general sort of manner so that any student can answer. But as we know, those of us who are teachers, who have some teaching experience, you have to be very careful with how you ask the questions, because if you ask a question in such a way as to address a particular student, he or she may feel quite pressurized, okay? Like they may not feel good about that. Again, they feel they've been forced to answer that question. So we have to be very careful, unless we know, this person is quite keen to answer and he knows the answer and so on. Otherwise, we more or less leave it open. But when students come back with the answers, then there are all kinds of dynamics as well. Sometimes one student will answer the question, but wrongly, or, he doesn't fully give a correct answer. Another student may come in and correct him or comment on him. So then some kind of interaction starts to build up around this configuration, so that the students may, in a sense, be interacting with each other, but against the teacher's question. This thesis that I was telling you about, my students actually looking at those situations where there's all kinds of interaction going on like that, and to find out how students actually can learn from that. So there's a lot of learning being done in the classroom that goes beyond the teacher and the class conversation, if you like. Okay, so that is part of the learning, obviously, but it's more one-sided, and it's more like a lecture kind of thing. It's during those moments where students actually get kind of excited, feel involved in a particular thing, and there's kind of maybe contesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Different answers. That kind of they can learn a lot from that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
This brings me to this follow-up question about online classrooms nowadays with the pandemic. So how to do CA analysis in a Zoom meeting like this in an online classroom? Can we still do classroom analysis in a Zoom online meeting in an online classroom?
I think so. I mean, we can still have obviously, many of us have no choice anyway, but to run a class on Zoom. And I think there's also been studies and also internal questionnaires and so on within universities about these classes. And actually, the response generally has been quite positive. Like from the teachers, also from the students, we get the general, evaluation that actually it kind of works, And in fact, some teachers are saying the students are more willing to ask questions.
But you see, like in this Zoom meeting, there's always one person holding the speaking turn. And of course, there can be multiple, the participants can be WhatsApping their friends, doing a ton of other things, but we simply have no access to it. We just have one person, another person, we're very tidy, taking turns.
Yeah. Indeed. And that's why I still think that the face-to-face is the best environment, certainly for learning, but also for all kinds of things, like meetings and certainly friends, having a chat, talking to each other, catching up. I mean, you can catch up on Zoom, but it's not the same thing, right? As you sit down and have a cup of coffee and catch up that way, because you get the full body language.
It's much more formal, isn't it? The online classroom has been made more formal.
Yeah. So you're right, but in that case, the limitation is in the medium itself, you see. So if the Zoom environment allows or opens up certain possibilities for teaching and learning, that's fine. But at the same time, it also imposes some limitations on it. So as analysts, we can only work within those parameters. Like there's, if you like, nothing much we can do about the limitations. In fact, it may be our job to point out those limitations.
Yeah.
Right, so that the school management, the university people, they know, the problems that the students are facing.
The functionality of Zoom kind of constrain the kind of interactions and participation configurations, right?
Yeah, it's not the same thing as a real classroom situation where, for one thing, the teacher can not only see all the students, but also can see the reaction.
Much more embodiment.
You can see a particular student making a particular expression on the face.
And other students can laugh, right? Can express laughter at any remarks made by the teacher.
Laugh, and they can look at each other, right?
Yeah. So that kind of emotional engagement seems to be made to disappear in the Zoom. Also want to ask Gifty's follow-up question, because Gifty is a human resource manager. I mean, her
see.
previous job, and
Mhm.
her interest is how to use CA to analyze, because nowadays human resources professionals, they use this called PAP, People's Analytic Platforms. So you just
Oh.
click, and then you can pull out all the Excel file data about the sick leave rates, or I mean,
Mhm.
so her job, her analytical job is how to analyze a HR professional sitting in front of this big screen with this dashboard of this people's analytic. And okay, let me see how many people taken sick leave. And then,
See.
so how to use CA to analyze multimodally the HR's job of using this technology to do
Mhm.
their job. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah, in fact, I was going to ask Gifty about this people analytics platform because it's new. It's new to me. Right? I don't know about
It's
this
new to
platform.
me too, but I've seen it as like a dashboard. It's kind of like a dashboard. You can, with all your company's data. So you can click in an icon and you can get the graphs, the visualization of how many people have taken sick leave or taken, how
Right.
many people has worked overtime, and also how
Right.
many people have resigned. Things like that. It's just a very complicated technological platform with all your data at your fingertips.
Right. Right. Yeah, certainly we can do some work on that, and there has been some, quite a bit of work. Not so much CA, but there's a lot of methodological work been done on workplace practices. People in their workplaces. So in this case, an HR office, or maybe people have studied bus stations or train stations, the operation rooms, right, or airport control towers, or even the cockpit, the pilots, and his assistants, and what do they do? All kinds of things, So ethnomethodology and CA are certainly open to and also capable of providing some framework, some tools for the study of work. What it means to do some work in a particular organization, and what are the means that people use to achieve those goals. And most of these, of course, will involve interaction, because typically, I mean, you can't go into an office and you work all by yourself, right? I mean, even in this case, even if like you're the only one around, everybody else is on holiday or working from home, and you're working with this computer using the people analytics platform, right? There's still interaction between the human and the computer, of course. And there's a lot of work on human computer interaction in ethnomethodology, where where you click, how do you query the system, what results come back, and how do you interpret and understand the results, all of that. You can study that, but it's a bit different from CA. It's a bit more complicated in a sense, because you don't just make a video recording of it. Probably you also need a recording,
Yeah.
but you also need to record the screenshots, like how the screen goes. And also you may need to talk to the guy who uses the platform.
Yeah,
to find
interview.
out what, right? Yeah, interviews.
And
Find out,
think aloud, right? I have asked her to also think aloud protocol.
It's
The guy
quite
who-
possible, yeah. Yeah, think about how to do that, and whether. And the good thing about this kind of research is that it has a lot of application potential.
Very useful.
So, like, right, what you find out, you can feed back to the software people, the computer
Very
to
important
improve,
gift you're doing.
right? Yeah, the dashboard, the interface, how to, because how the human mind works may not be fully accommodated by the computer system, because the computer system works in a different kind of way, right? The thinking behind it is all based on the programming.
And also
Which,
there will be social justice implications, because typically these kinds of technology platforms are designed for a kind of middle class, westernized, Western educated. It privileges some professionals against some other professionals. I mean, people coming from other cultural backgrounds. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Gifty is in the audience. So, okay, I hope you're happy with the answer, Gifty. And those who are in the audience, feel free to type in your questions. While we need to wrap up a bit, because I'm aware of the time and it's very exhausting for KK. And so any last round of questions, your golden chance. Social media, I have seen a question about Bongi. How to analyze interactions on social media, like people typing comments underneath the YouTube video or in WhatsApp, right? Like it's no spoken, but you have a ready-made transcript, right? Emoji, okay?
Yeah. No, this is great this is great data. I am actually working on some of this data. I haven't had the chance to show you today. Some of my students are doing that. And of course, with the new environment provided by social media, we do have a lot more interaction these days between people.
And maybe
all kinds
KK,
of
you
reasons,
can,
right?
sorry, you can stop sharing so that we can have a bigger picture of you.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah, so actually this social media data, as you say, it's ready-made, it's there. You don't need to transcribe it, it's already, in written form. And also, in most cases, you can get participants' consent for use of it, as long as you kind of blacken out the names or you cross out some personal references to things. It's quite easy, right? So actually these days, what I do on my course with the students is if they need to do a project, they have a choice between collecting some video data from some situation or other, or they can use social media. So most of them actually choose social media. It's more kind of readily available. And I accept that. And in fact, some of the students go on to write a project, like a final year project, kind of short dissertation on that. And I'm working with one or two of them on some papers which we may publish. So they're, good enough for publication. Because the data is very rich, you get people talking to each other and you get a lot of interaction. But obviously, when you do the analysis of this kind of data, you have to be mindful of the nature of that data, which is quite different from face-to-face, right? So for example, sometimes the timing is off, like the person may not immediately reply to your post. There may be a gap, or sometimes there may be like cross postings, right? Because of the time gaps. But by and large, those are not insurmountable issues, right? I mean, you just need to clean up the data a bit and so on. And still you are going to get some good conversations from those data. And my students have looked at many different issues or phenomena in the data, like how people plan to meet, for example, right? I mean, there's 3 or 4 friends in a group. They want to meet up for dinner over the weekend. How do they do that, for example, right? That's quite interesting. or sometimes it's people, having some problems and they seek help from their friends. So the emotionality comes into it. And if they're willing to share that data without the names on it, of course, we cross out the names. It's also very good data. I have some very good student projects using this kind of thing, and I'm all for, because again, for me, CA is applicable to all kinds of interactions. And for sure, social media is in these days and age, like the most common form of interaction, really.
I'd like to take the advantage of the chair's privilege to ask the last question, if our audience doesn't have.
I have a question actually.
Oh, Chinghua. Okay,
Yes.
Chinghua asked.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Because in my dissertation, I have also been analyzing the data from social media, WeChat, chatting records. So after this process, I kind of feel that I'm not sure if you agree that I think it will be more difficult for me to analyze a social media data if I do not personally know the person who are carrying out the conversation and know them enough to be able to know what is going on in here. So I want to ask what's your comments on this? And I have another question as well. It's like while we were doing the conversation analysis, we transcribed it and we figured it out what did the participants say. But I think at this point, when we say what do they mean, we are already in this process, right? To say what they actually mean. And then in your book, I think that you emphasize that there's some kind of a bottom-up approach towards conversation analysis. So my question is, when do theory jump in the process of analysis? At what stage? Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So Qinghua's got two questions there, right?
Yes.
So maybe let's look at the first question first. What was it? The social media data, was it?
Yeah. I feel like I have to know
how
them.
well you know the participants, right? So yeah, because in fact we face the same problem when we look at let's say face-to-face conversational data. As I mentioned earlier, like you got 2 or 3 participants talking to each other, and sometimes you know very little about their background. Sometimes you know a lot about them because they happen to be your friends, right? And so I think it's reasonable to see that obviously the more you know about the participants, the more likely you're going to be able to analyze the interaction at a deeper level. Because I mean for some of, depending on the topic, but if they happen to be talking about something that you know the background of, then you're in a better position to better understand what is it that they are talking about and why are they making those comments that they do. So so this applies to social media data as well. But this does not mean that you cannot analyze social media data where you don't know the participants. Because the amazing thing about our social life is that you can see a scene, you can observe an interaction between 2 strangers that you know nothing about, but you still can make some sense of that, right? Especially if it's on a social media platform where you see a record of what they say and you can look at it more carefully instead of just flipping past. So there's still a lot that you can do even with kind of anonymous. So, but of course, you have to, we have to admit that there are limitations to that. So that's my answer to your first question. As to the second one, what was the second one?
Okay, the second one is when do we apply theory,
the theory,
when we
right.
analyze the data?
So what do you mean by theory?
Like, for example, while I was analyzing the data, I have a research interest. There's a kind of a phenomenon or a social phenomenon that I want to look at. So from your point of view, you mentioned about the bottom-up approach. So when do I apply my research interest on it?
Very good, yeah. That is a very good question. So you have the data, and you have some kind of research question, some kind of hypothesis, some kind of idea, right, that you have in mind. So your task, what you hope to achieve, is to make it, to see the two sets of phenomena meet somewhere, like your questions, right, and your ideas, somehow drawn into conversation with the data, right? So that would be an ideal situation. But in order for that to happen, we have to be careful of what we do when we analyze the data. So because the data, in a sense, is there. Like, people set things, they do things, and you make a record of that. And basically, because this is naturally occurring, that means that is just how it is. Like, like it rained this morning. There's nothing you can do about that. There was raining this morning, right? And if you took a video of the rain outside the window, you can always play back and see the rain. You can't pretend that there was no rain, right? It's there. So you can analyze that. Now with your idea, the thing to do is to resist the temptation of imposing your idea on the data. Okay, resist the temptation to impose your idea or your hypothesis on the data. You can keep that in mind, and you can use the data to kind of test your hypothesis. And if you find something in the data, for example, your interest is in whatever race, okay, like racial issues. Okay, so that can be a very good topic. But you get the data, and it's very easy to fall into the trap of, oh, here's a black guy and here's a white guy, and they're talking to each other. Wow, there must be some racial issues there, right? Because this guy looks black, right? And this other guy looks white, right? So bound to be racial issues. Of course, likely there will be some racial issues may surface from the data, but you cannot impose on the data. Like, there must be such issues, right? So it's not for you to make that decision. It's for you to catch those moments where some potential, racial issues surface or emerge, and you try to be sensitive to that, and you analyze that, you go into it. Okay, so your theory moves in when there's a chance, but you don't kind of impose your theory on the data so that it actually changes the nature of the data, like what we saw just now in that short video. So you see this Chinese looking guy, right? So you cannot impose your theory and say, oh, here's a Chinese guy talking to an Italian guy or something, right? So there must be some sort of nationality issues involved, right? There may not be. And also what people look like is not necessarily who they are in terms of their culture, in terms of their class, right? It's very hard to know these days because especially in the more affluent societies, the poor people may not actually dress that way. Like, you know, it's not necessarily, you can't tell from the appearance. Obviously, you have to look at what they actually do, and you test your ideas against the recordings of what they do. So that's my only cautionary remark about your theory. You know, make sure that it actually fits the data.
Thank you.
KK, there is a question in the chat box. Can
right.
you look at the chat box by Dong or you?
For you. Okay, my question about the repair of the parent-kid interaction. According to research finding, capacity of the adult repair initiating turn to locate the source of the trouble in the child's prior turn, hence facilitate natural linguistic repair, is seen not only as an effective resolution, but also as an educational stimulus that shapes the child's learning in the adult language. However, can we use CA to prove such kind of language learning? Yes, that's a very good question. So this is like a mother-child interaction, okay, or carer-child interaction. Sometimes it's the mother, maybe it's the father, and sometimes it's a family member or, you know, a helper, a child. And a lot of the learning, as we know from the literature, is done through something like scaffolding, right? Or something like you know, so for example, the adult asks a question, the child answers the question, and then the adult now uses the child's answer as a platform to build further development or further understanding based on that answer. And sometimes if the answer comes back with some kind of trouble or error in it, then the adult can again build on that by initiating repair so that the child can correct the error or can build upon the limited understanding or can switch his perspective, right? So as to align with the original question and so on. So actually, CA is a perfect framework for studying this kind of thing because you need to go into the turn-by-turn analysis here to see what kind of opportunities show up for the adult to use the repair mechanism to provide learning opportunities for the kid. And at the same time, don't forget that the other side of the formula is the kid. So we have seen in our data that even very young children, like maybe 3 years old, I mean, they can say a few things, but obviously they don't know all that much about the world, except a little world within the home environment. But they actually also, in terms of interaction, they know a lot about interaction, like they can deal with repair sequences, right? Like nobody taught them, you know, this is repair, okay, so remember, you know, do this and do that. No, they kind of just pick it up. I mean, I think certainly they were not born with it. Nobody was born with a repair mechanism in their heads. And they were not taught it in school or even by the parents, but somehow they develop a working capacity for it, like they can do it, right? And they can use that to do further learning and development, because this is, I think, an essential, a very important mechanism for child language and cognitive development. Yeah, so it's a great topic for you. Yeah.
Thank you. And any last question from anybody? If not, then I really want to thank KK and Professor Luke, my mentor and my lifelong mentor. I keep learning from Dr. Luke, Professor Luke, and I'm so lucky to have been under KK's supervision. I mean, it's something that I will be grateful for the rest of my life. So thank you, KK. And yeah, so July 1st, we have another seminar, July 1st, North American time, and July 2nd, 8 a.m. in the morning will be Hong Kong, Singapore time. So until then, we will say goodbye, but we certainly need to invite Professor K.K. Luke back, because we could see that we really need to have a kind of like hands-on analyzing the data. We really want to see Professor Luke demonstrating how to analyze a piece of data with us. I think you cannot take any course, because Gifty was asking me, well, where can I take a course to learn how to do discourse analysis, conversation analysis? I said, I mean, not to denigrate my colleagues. I said in my faculty, there might just be one or two people who know how to do this. So we really need to invite you back, KK, and that time we will do a hands-on, real-time data analysis, and all of us can benefit so much. I still remember the many hours you actually sat down with me, and we didn't have videotape. We only had audio tapes. And we look at the transcript I made, and then you gave me real-time mentoring, and that has benefited me immensely. And that kind of mentorship, I can never get in any course, any program, okay, in this world. So once more, thank you so much. And I'd like my host to say something before we say goodbye to KK. So Qinghua.
Thank you, Dr. Lu, for answering my question. And I really enjoyed the session and looking forward to having you again and learn from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Phoebe.
Bye now. Yeah, good luck to all your studies and projects.
Phoebe.
Thank you, Professor Luke, for spending your time to read our documents, our emails, and also you have brought us a lot of lively example, and I really like the seminar scene, like the BBQ scene and all the bullpen circulation scene. And we are looking forward to have a hands-on workshop with you in the future. And then we are very happy to have all your students from Singapore and also Hong Kong or other parts of the world with us. Thank you for joining us today as well. Thank you.
You have several generations of students.
Okay, thank you for organizing. Yeah.
April.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Luke, for your inspiring talk today, especially the comments on how CA can be applied to solve the most important issues nowadays. For example, the language use in social media and also the Zoom teaching, the online teaching. Thank you so much.
Bongi, if you're around. Yeah, Bongi.
To all of you.
Bongi is already a doctor now. Dr.
Wow.
Bongi is also a lecturer in the University of Winnipeg. Just moving there today, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Winnipeg.
Moving tomorrow.
Okay.
So just echoing, thank you so much for the inspiring talk. It was really refreshing to hear someone who is so knowledgeable in CA, but also very open to the limitation and potentials of what CA brings to us. And just echoing what Angel was saying, I really wanted to see that how you analyze the data, and that was I really enjoyed reading the data analysis that you gave it to us, and I was constantly nodding when I was reading it and taking much of notes. So I do believe that we can benefit a lot from actually seeing the analysis. And at the same time, another like thread of my thought was like, one of your comments was the CA also allows us to look at both what and how, but a lot of the CA analysis is focusing on how rather than what. And I wanted to see how this can go together and so forth. So just so much looking forward to the next opportunity to learn more from you. And thank you again today.
Yeah, what, how, and why too, right? For education research, right? And I would call it next time master ed. We will see how a master analyst do the master kind of ed, right? So Professor Luke will be the master to show us how to do analysis. So once again, thanks so much, KK. Thank you so much.
Angel, on the point of
why
kind of demonstration or how to do the analysis. Those of you who may consider going to the ICCA conference next year, it's in
Where is it?
Australia. It's in Brisbane.
Oh, Australia! Of course,
Yeah.
we need to go. Yeah.
Brisbane. Yeah, ICCA is the CA conference in Brisbane
July?
in June.
June. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be giving a class there.
You will be
do
giving
data.
a class
Yeah,
there.
just
We must
exactly
go.
what you were saying, you know. So I'm going to just give a bunch of data to the students and take you through line by line.
You mean it's a pre-conference workshop?
Yeah, pre-conference workshop.
Oh.
That is one opportunity, but of course, I know most of you probably can't make such a long trip, so I'll still be happy to come back and just.
Yeah, we will
work
do
with you.
both. We will go to the conference and we will invite you back to have this real master mentoring us. So thanks so much again. And I know it's been 2 hours, so thank you so much for spending your time in the morning. So until next time, keep well and take care, everybody. Thanks again, Professor
My
Lu.
pleasure. Yeah, thank you for organizing.
Bye.
Bye.